Martin, stop talking over Birdie.
He never listens.
Birdie has written 3 history books.
See her now, Martin.
If you've ever been in a room where someone talked over another person so many times that the second person eventually stopped trying to speak, you already know exactly what this story is about. You already know the feeling in your chest before the first word is out of my mouth. Before we get into it, if these family feud moments speak to you, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Because every single week, we bring you the stories from this stage that go deeper than the game, deeper than the money, and deeper than anything the producers planned. On a Tuesday afternoon in Nashville, Tennessee, a man named Martin Holsworth walked onto the stage of the family feud the way he had walked through most of his adult life, slightly ahead of his wife. Martin was 62 years old, retired middle school principal from Decatur, Illinois, 29 years of running a school, 300 parent-teacher conferences a year, a man who had spent nearly 3 decades being the final word in every room he entered, the one who summarized the meeting, sent everyone home, and locked the door. He had a firm handshake and the easy, expansive confidence of someone who had never once stood in a doorway, wondering whether he was allowed to walk through it. He smiled the moment he shook Steve Harvey's hand, and the smile said, "I know how this works, and I am going to enjoy every second of it." He introduced himself clearly, warmly, with his full name, and then he turned to the woman standing to his right, gestured broadly in her direction, and said, "And this is my wife. She keeps me organized." Her name was Vera Holsworth. She went by Birdie, had since she was 7 years old, when her grandmother told her she moved through rooms the way a bird moves through a library. Quiet, purposeful, touching only what was hers. Birdie was 59. For 28 years, she had worked as a school librarian at Lincoln Elementary in Decatur. She had done the work with a deep, unhurried competence that most institutions quietly depend on and almost never acknowledge, recommending the right book to the right child without being asked, staying late on Fridays to read aloud to second graders whose home lives made quiet evenings hard to find, stretching a budget that would have made a less determined person quit within the first year. She had cataloged over 4,000 volumes by hand before the district finally upgraded its system. She knew the reading level of every child on her roster within 2 weeks of the school year starting, and she matched each one to a book, the way you match a key to a lock, precisely, without fanfare, without expecting anyone to notice. She had retired 14 months before this taping. Martin had retired 4 months before she did. His retirement had been marked by a department breakfast, a framed certificate, and a story in the local paper, with a photograph of him at his desk. Birdie's last day had been a Friday. She had returned her keys to the front office, said goodbye to the custodial staff, and driven home. There was no breakfast. There was no photograph. There had been a card signed by the second-grade team with a gift card to a bookstore, which she had used on the same day she received it. In the 14 months since her retirement, while Martin had been playing golf 3 times a week and reorganizing the garage and talking at neighborhood fences about what it felt like to finally have time, Birdie Holsworth had done something she had not fully told her husband about. Not in a way he had ever thought to ask. She had written 3 books, not journal entries, not blog posts. 3 bound, indexed, footnoted, thoroughly researched local history books about Macon County, Illinois. She had spent the first 4 months building source lists and filing Freedom of Information requests with the county recorder's office. She had driven twice to Springfield to access documents in the state archive. She had corresponded with the descendants of 6 families whose names had been quietly removed from the official county records in the 1930s during a political reorganization that no one had bothered to document accurately. She had written in the early mornings before Martin was awake, at the kitchen table, with a mug of coffee and the kind of focused silence that libraries had taught her to inhabit. All 3 books were self-published at her own expense. Volume 1 sat on the reference shelf at the Decatur Public Library. Volume 2 was held by the Illinois State Historical Archive. Volume 3 had been cited in a graduate paper from the University of Illinois. In the spring of the year, Birdie was invited to appear on this show. The acknowledgement section of Volume 3 thanked Martin, in a single line, between a reference librarian named Phyllis and the county recorder's office, for making room. Martin did not know there were 3 books. He knew about one, sort of. He had seen a box on the kitchen table the previous November and asked what was in it. She had said, "Just a little project." He had said, "That's nice, Bertie," and carried the box to the garage to make space for a cheese board he had ordered online. Steve Harvey had read all 3 books. His research team had handed him a copy of Volume 2 backstage 20 minutes before the taping began. He had stood in the corridor in his suit jacket and read 60 pages of The Millworkers of Macon County, 1887-1922, before he had to walk onto the stage. He had carried the book out with him and set it quietly on his host's podium without announcing why. The Holsworth family came in 5, Bertie and Martin at the 2 center positions. Their daughter Roslyn, 34. A dental hygienist from Bloomington, to Bertie's left. Their son Marcus, 31, an electrician, to Martin's right, and Martin's cousin Nate on the far end, who had agreed to come because, as he explained it backstage, he worked nights and hadn't been anywhere since February. The opposing family was the Garza family from San Antonio, Texas. Their matriarch was Celestina Garza, 68 years old. Retired labor rights paralegal. 40 years of preparing testimony for workers, tenants, and families who were being steamrolled by paperwork they couldn't fight alone. She had the kind of measured stillness that comes from spending decades in rooms where the wrong sentence at the wrong moment costs someone else everything. She had brought her 2 daughters and a son-in-law, and they played together with the warm, coordinated ease of a family that had spent years showing up for each other in rooms that were harder than this one. Celestina noticed Martin Holsworth within the first 2 minutes. The game opened with Ray's standard warm-up questions, the kind designed to get the families relaxed and talking before the first survey round began. Steve Harvey turned to Bertie first, because he had read the book, and because he wanted to hear her speak before the clock started. He asked her what she had been doing with her time since retiring. Martin answered, "Oh, she reads," he said, with an easy laugh that reached out to the audience and invited them to share the warmth of it. "She's always had her nose in something. The library never really left her, I guess." Steve Harvey looked at Bertie. Bertie smiled the way women who have been married a long time sometimes smile, the smile that has absorbed so much repetition that it no longer costs much to produce. "That's about right," she said. Steve Harvey nodded, made a small note on the back of his question card, and moved the game forward. The first round was clean and fast. Survey questions, board reveals, the familiar back and forth that gives a studio audience something to cheer about. Martin was loud and sharp and frequently correct. He hit the buzzer with the heel of his palm. When a right answer came in, he threw his arms up the way men do when they've been waiting all their life for a scoreboard. He was by every visible measure having the best day he had had in months. Bertie played when she was called upon. Her answers were unhurried and consistently high on the board. On the question, "Name something people save for years before they finally use it," she said. Without pausing, "The good dishes." Number 1 answer. 43 points. Martin looked at the board and clapped. Not at her, exactly, but in the direction of the points. The way you clap when a machine has produced the output you wanted. "There you go," he said, as if she had turned in an assignment he'd been waiting for. On the very next question, "Name something a woman does that gets less credit than it deserves," Martin reached the buzzer before Bertie could get there. He answered. The board buzzed. Wrong. Nate tried one. Wrong. Marcus almost had it. The clock ran out before they could recover. They gave the points away. Steve Harvey crossed to the Holsworth side of the stage during the round change and paused beside Martin with the relaxed pleasantness of a host who has all day. "You're having a good time up here," he said. "Every single second," Martin said. "What about Bertie? She having a good time?" Martin put his arm around Bertie's shoulder in the automatic way of a man who has been doing this for decades without thinking about whether it is wanted. "Bertie's always fine. She doesn't need much." Steve Harvey looked at Bertie for a long, quiet moment. Bertie said, "I'm doing well, thank you." From across the stage, Celestina Garza had stopped watching the board. The second round was where the room began to change. Steve Harvey put up the question, "Name something a husband doesn't realize his wife is doing for him." Before Martin could process what he was hearing, Bertie's hand was on the buzzer, clear and fast, faster than she had moved all game. Martin turned to look at her, slightly surprised. A little pleased, the way a teacher is pleased when a student finally shows initiative. Bertie said, keeping track of everything. Survey says. The board lit up. Number 1, 57 points. Martin looked at the board and said, almost to himself, in the way a man says something when he assumes no one is measuring his words, didn't know that was a competition. The audience heard it. Steve Harvey heard it. Celestina Garza heard it, and she straightened her posture slightly at her podium. 2 answers left to find. Nate got 11 points on cooking. Martin tried staying positive and got a blank board and the buzzer. Then Birdie buzzed again. Handling the money, she said. Martin laughed. Not a cruel laugh. A laugh you could call affectionate if you weren't paying attention to what the laugh was doing. It reached out to the audience the way his earlier laugh had, pulling them into a shared understanding of something. That's one way to put it, he said. The board lit up. Number 2, 34 points. Steve Harvey collected the round and moved to the next, but before he crossed back to the center, he looked once at Birdie, a steady level look that said nothing and meant everything. Birdie held it for a half second and then looked back at the board. Later, when Roslyn was asked what the afternoon felt like from the podium, she would say, it felt like watching someone tighten a knot and not know they were doing it. The middle rounds went back and forth. The Garza family were a pleasure to watch. Celestina passed her buzzer turns to her granddaughter twice and let the girl discover the answer herself, with the patience of someone who had spent decades teaching people that they already knew more than they thought. They laughed in the real, uncalculated way of a family that had been through enough together that nothing on a game show stage could embarrass them. The Holsworth rounds continued in their pattern. Martin answered when he should have waited. He spoke over Roslyn once. He corrected Marcus on a question where Marcus had the right answer and Martin had the wrong one, and was gracious about it afterward in the way that costs very little. And then, in the break before Fast Money, he did the thing that ended the version of that afternoon he thought he was having. He turned to the audience, not to Birdie, not to Ray, to the audience, and said, with a broad, inviting grin, "What do you say we put Birdie up there for Fast Money? Let the woman have a shot." He was smiling. He was enjoying himself. He thought it was generous. That was the part that made it land the way it did, that he had offered it like a gift. Steve Harvey heard it. He stood at the center of the stage and was quiet for a moment that lasted a beat longer than usual. Then he said, "Actually, I was going to ask her myself." He walked to Birdie's podium. "Birdie, you want to go in?" Birdie put her hands on the podium rail. "Yes," she said. What happened in the next 60 seconds is the part that people who were in that studio still describe to people who weren't. Celestina Garza reached down and picked up her placard from the Garza podium. She did not rush. She did not make a production of it. She simply stood up, crossed the stage at a deliberate, unhurried pace, and came to stand beside Birdie Holsworth at the Fast Money podium. The studio went still. Steve Harvey had a rule, personal, unwritten, the kind of rule that comes from years of watching rooms reveal the truth about people, that when something real is happening, you don't fill it with noise, you let it breathe. He stood at the center of the stage and let it breathe. Then he looked at Celestina and said, quietly, "Ma'am, why'd you do that?" Celestina Garza looked at him with the calm of a woman who had spent 40 years in rooms, deciding which things were worth saying out loud. "Because somebody in this room should have done it a long time ago," she said. And I could see it wasn't going to be the men. The audience sat with that for 3 full seconds. Then they were on their feet. Martin Holsworth sat down on the platform step behind his podium. Steve Harvey let the room settle. Then he walked to his own podium, picked up the book that had been sitting there since the beginning of the taping, and held it up. "Mr. Holsworth," he said, "this is your wife's book." Martin looked at it. "Yeah, she did a little project, it's the second one," Steve Harvey said. Martin went quiet. "There are 3, Steve Harvey said. He did not say it with heat. He said it the way you say a fact that needs to be in the room. Volume 1 is on the reference shelf at the Decatur Public Library. Volume 2 is what I'm holding. Volume 3 was cited in a University of Illinois graduate paper this past spring. All 3 are held by the Illinois State Historical Archive." He paused. "Did you know that?" The studio was quiet enough to hear the cooling system. "I thought there was one," Martin said. The ease had gone out of his voice completely, the way heat leaves a room when a window opens in winter. "She wrote 3 books," Steve Harvey said. "She researched them herself. She self-published them at her own expense. She did the indexing, the footnotes, the source verification, the freedom of information requests. She drove to Springfield. Twice. She did all of this in 14 months, at your kitchen table before you were awake in the mornings. He set the book back on the podium. And you introduced her as your organizer. Martin looked at the floor between his shoes. Bertie stood very still beside Celestina Garza. She was not crying. She was not performing gratitude or relief or vindication. She looked the way a person looks when they hear a true sentence said out loud in a room where it has never been said before. Like they are still deciding whether it is safe to believe it. Steve Harvey turned to the clock. "Bertie," he said, 20 seconds. "Ready?" She pressed her hands flat on the podium rail, the hands of someone who has put things in order for a living. "Ready," she said. The clock started. "Name something you wish you'd done sooner." Without a breath between, told people what I was working on. Name something people keep even when it stops working. Habits. Name something that takes longer when no one's watching. Everything. Name something a house has that a building doesn't. Memory. Name something a woman knows without being taught. One beat. Quiet and full. And then, when she's not being seen. The buzzer sounded. Steve Harvey held up his hand. He turned to the board, but he turned to Martin first. "I'm going to read these back," he said. "I want you to listen. Not to the points, just to the answers." He turned to face the board. She said, "Told people what I was working on." The board lit. Number 1. 46 points. She said habits. Number 1. 51 points. She said everything. Number 2. 38 points. She said memory. Number 1. 42 points. He paused. A full pause, so the room could feel the weight of what was coming. She said, "When she's not being seen." The board held for 1 moment. Then it lit. Number 1, 59 points. Total, 236 points. The round was won. Rosalind had both hands over her face. Marcus was looking at the ceiling, the way men look at ceilings when they are losing the argument with themselves about crying in front of a television crew. Nate had gone very still, which for Nate, they would all agree later, was the loudest thing he did all day. Martin Holsworth was sitting on the platform step with his elbows on his knees. Steve Harvey walked to him. He did not crouch down, did not make it smaller by trying to be gentle with it. He just stood there, the way you stand in front of a man when you need him to look up. Martin looked up. "I didn't know," Martin said. His voice was low and honest and did not have anything left in it to manage. "About the books. About any of it. I never thought to ask." "No," Steve Harvey said. Plain and even and without cruelty. Just plain. "You didn't." He let that sit the way you let something sit when it needs to be sat with. Then he said, "Do you want to know what the third book is about?" Martin nodded. "It's about the school teachers of Macon County," Steve Harvey said. "Every teacher between 1891 and 1952. Their names, their salaries, the schools they built, the schools that burned." She tracked down the families of 6 teachers who were written out of the official county records in the 1930s and put their names back in the historical record. People who did the work and got forgotten. He paused. She dedicated the book to them. The dedication is 4 words. He looked at Bertie. For the ones doing. Martin put both hands over his face. Steve Harvey gave him the moment. He gave him the whole moment, which on television costs more than almost anything else. Then he walked back to where Bertie was standing beside Celestina Garza, and said, quietly enough that the microphone only just caught it, "Did you know he'd never read them?" Bertie looked at her hands for a moment. "He would have helped," she said. "And then they would have been ours. I needed them to be mine." Steve Harvey nodded slowly. "They are yours," he said. "They've been yours the whole time." He turned to face the audience, and then the cameras. "Sometimes," he said, "the person standing next to you has been building something extraordinary while you've been filling the room. And here's the part that's hard to sit with. They didn't hide it to hurt you. They just needed one thing in their life that belonged entirely to them. Something that no one could improve, or manage, or get their fingerprints on. Just a thing with their name on it, and no one else's." He looked back at Martin. "That's not a verdict. That's an invitation. There are 3 books sitting in your house, sir. You know what to do." Celestina Garza returned to her podium the same unhurried way she had left it. As she crossed back, She put her hand briefly on Bertie's arm. Not a speech, not a statement, just a hand. Bertie covered it with her own for 1 second. That single image, 2 women, strangers, their hands meeting on a game show stage for the length of one breath, became the still that ran in every article, every caption, every share, for the next 2 weeks. The Garza family won the main game. Steve Harvey called it the most gracefully contested afternoon he had hosted all season. Martin did not say much for the rest of the taping. When the families walked off the stage, he found Bertie in the corridor and asked if he could carry her bag. She said yes. He picked it up. He walked beside her, not slightly ahead, just beside, and he didn't speak. And she didn't speak. And that, Rosalind told Marcus in the parking lot afterward, was the most surprising thing she had ever seen their father do. The episode aired 6 weeks later. The clip of Celestina Garza crossing the stage was shared 100,000 times within the first 24 hours. Not the fast money sweep, the crossing. The moment where a woman from the opposing team, someone who had never met Bertie Holsworth before that afternoon and would not see her again for months, simply stood up and walked across a stage to stand beside her. The clip had almost no sound on the viral versions. People shared it muted, with captions, because the image said what the audio couldn't improve on. The comments were quiet in a way that viral moments usually are not. "This is my mother. I've been at that podium for 22 years. The way she just walks. Like it's obvious. Like there's no other option. I have 3 unfinished things in a drawer and I told myself it was to protect them." Bertie gave one interview, a small paper in Decatur. The reporter asked what it felt like to be recognized on national television. Bertie said, "I was already doing the work. The recognition doesn't change the work. It just means you don't have to be quiet about it anymore." Martin gave no interviews. What he did, 6 days after the episode aired, was drive to the Decatur Public Library and check out all 3 of Bertie's books, with his library card like any other patron, and carry them to the chair near the window where she used to read to the 2nd graders on Friday afternoons. He read Volume 1, straight through. He started Volume 2. He did not tell Bertie he was there. He did not tell anyone. A librarian named Phyllis, the same Phyllis from the acknowledgments page, 3 lines above his own name, recognized him when he came in. She waited until he was settled with the book. Then she took a photograph from across the room and texted it to Bertie with 4 words. "He's on Volume 2. Bertie did not go to the library. She sat at the kitchen table, held her phone, and cried for about 6 minutes. Not in front of anyone, not for any audience. The way she had written the books, in the quiet that was hers. Then she got up and made dinner. When Martin came home and sat down, she said, "How's the book?" He looked at her for a long moment, the way a man looks at someone when he is just beginning to understand what he has been looking at wrong for a very long time. "You knew." "Phyllis texted me." He nodded. He put his fork down. "It's good," he said. His voice was rough at the edges. It's good, Bertie, the chapter about the teacher whose classroom flooded. The one who kept holding school in her kitchen. Sarah Moffat," Bertie said. "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know. I just didn't know you were doing that. You would have helped," she said. "I know." He looked at his hands on the table. "I know I would have." She let it sit, the way she had learned to let things sit, with patience, without pressing. Then she said, "The 3rd one is the best. I want you to read that one last." He promised her he would. He kept the promise. Within a week of the episode airing, the Decatur Public Library reported a wait list at 17 branches across the state for Bertie's volumes. A small regional press called and asked about a 2nd print run, something she had not considered when she had loaded 400 copies into the back of her car and driven them to the archive herself. She called Rosalind. Rosalind said, "Mom, say yes." She said yes. The 2nd print run included a new author's note. 3 sentences. These books were written in 14 months. In the early mornings before anyone else was awake, at a kitchen table in Decatur, Illinois. They are about people whose work got done, and then got forgotten. I hope they are harder to forget now. Celestina Garza sent a card after the episode aired. No return address. The show's production team had passed along Bertie's mailing information with her permission. The card said, "I have spent 40 years in rooms where someone was being talked over. You weren't asking for help. I know that. I just wanted you to know that someone else was watching. Birdie kept the card in the back of Volume 3, tucked inside the acknowledgements page, between the line for Phyllis and the line for her husband's name. Steve Harvey closed that broadcast the way he closed every episode of the Family Face-Off, walking to the edge of the stage, hands in his pockets, talking to the camera like he was talking to one person. I've been doing this long enough to know, he said, that every now and then somebody walks onto this stage carrying something the room doesn't know about yet. Something they've been building in the hours nobody schedules, with no audience and no applause, and no one to tell them it's going well. And the game gives you a window into it. 45 minutes to see what somebody is actually made of before the credits roll. He paused. The people who love them most are sometimes the last to see it, not because they don't care, because they stopped looking. Because the person standing in your kitchen every morning stopped feeling like a discovery. He was quiet for a moment. Look, he said, before you go home tonight. Just look. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. And if you're new here, subscribe and hit that bell, because the Family Face-Off brings you a moment like this every single week, and you don't want to miss the one that's made for you.